So I wanted to do a video tonight to talk about the top 10 languages you should consider learning in 2021. So there's a book that came out a number of years ago called The Pragmatic Programmer. In the book, one of the suggestions they had was that if you're a software engineer or a computer programmer, you should probably be trying to learn at least one new language every year. And so I was thinking, it's like it might help, to hear about some of the different languages that are popular or becoming popular, or they're just in wide use. So I decided to do this video to talk about the 10 that I would choose from if I was looking to learn a new programming language. So number 10 on my list is Java. So Java's been around for a while. It came out, I think, officially in 1995 from Sun Microsystems. It was originally developed by James Gosling, and it's really meant to be kind of like a very well-defined, general-purpose programming language, object-oriented, that would work very well with network systems. And interestingly enough, it started off, where it's like, oh well, you can do this kind of server stuff, but you can also build these, Java, applets that run on web pages and stuff like that. And at the same time that was happening, they also were developing, JavaScript. And so JavaScript wound up becoming the dominant programming language used in the browser, and Java applets kind of went away. But the server thing really took off. And if you look at a lot of the modern tech stacks that exist today, especially with these systems where you have lots of different services already, microservices as an example, that's one of the things that Java kind of excels at. And not only that, it's also a platform that you can actually run other languages. One of the other features of Java that's kind of nice is that it has a just-in-time compiler, and on top of that, when you compile, you actually compile down to a bytecode that can be then used on not just other operating systems, but completely different processors. So you can write and compile code that will run on an ARM processor or an Intel processor or a RISC-V processor. So another feature that I like a lot about Java is that it has garbage collection built into the language. And that comes in really handy because it turns out about half the bugs you deal with when you work as a software engineer tend to be related to the managing of memory. So for that, I'm going to make Java number 10. Number 9 is C#. And so C# is a language that I've used a lot myself. It's been closely, it's very heavily used in the .NET world. There's been a lot of interesting changes that have happened with .NET. .NET initially started off as being kind of a Windows-only thing, but it's since been open sourced. And it also runs on multiple different operating systems now. .NET Core does specifically, and it's part of a lot of the changes that Microsoft's been embracing, especially with their cloud services, because they want to make sure that people that are writing services for Linux servers or for Windows servers, you can write code and run code on any operating system, any processor. It has a lot of the same features as Java. It has garbage collection built into the language. It's also an object-oriented programming language. There's a lot of features that I like a lot in C#. They've done a lot to kind of keep the language modern. And there's a lot of features that you don't have in Java. So for instance, like properties, for example. You have properties are part of C#. So another reason to learn C# is there's a lot of companies out there. A lot of the companies I've worked for got started with their enterprise systems, basing it off of Microsoft servers and Microsoft stacks. And there's also a ton of legacy code out there that's written in C#. Another thing is that C# turns out it's been ported to different systems. So there's a project called the Mono project that's since kind of grown, and one of the things that came out of that was there's a framework called MonoGame. And so MonoGame is kind of nice because you can actually write games in C# that run on many different platforms. And if you do any game programming, you've probably heard of a framework called Unity. And Unity, one of the languages you can use when you're writing code is C#. So for that reason, I'm picking C# for number 9. Number 8, PHP. So PHP, another one that's been around for a long time. There's a lot of code written out there in PHP. PHP is kind of unique. It's a scripting language. It's also tends to be more of a dynamic language. It is possible to write object-oriented code with PHP, and there's just a ton of stuff. It became very popular on the Linux stack. You know, people are using MySQL. They might be using PHP, and one of the more popular web frameworks is built on top of PHP. And so if you've heard of WordPress, WordPress was originally built entirely on PHP, and still I think it's like the most popular website framework out there. So for that reason, I'm picking PHP, number 8. Number 7, C++, C. So I'm actually kind of combining two languages there. C++ is really written, it's based off of C, but it's kind of like C with types, or specifically C with object-oriented types. And so there's a language that Bjorn Joseph was inspired by called Semula. And essentially what he did was he took, the way that you could write object-oriented code, and he adapted that to C. And so C++ takes advantage of that. There's just a ton of code out there written in C++, and it's very popular, and it's also very portable. So if you need to be able to take code and be able to compile it for different processors and different operating systems, it's highly portable. Unlike Java and C#, it doesn't have garbage collection, but there's a lot of tools and stuff that you can use that make memory management a lot easier. But you do have to manage the memory yourself. For that reason, I'm picking C++. Number 6, Go, or Golang, sometimes it's referred to. This is a language that was developed out of Google in the late 2000s. And because they were looking for a replacement for C. And Go's interesting because it's not an object-oriented language. It's one that you can write types with, but it's become very popular for doing microservice programming and also for doing web programming. And one of the more interesting applications of Go has been a lot of command line tools. So, for instance, if you've used Docker, Docker is actually written in Golang. So for that reason, I'm picking Go for number 6. Number 5, Kotlin. So Kotlin is a language that also runs on top of the Java virtual machine. So I'd mentioned Java before. Java runs on a virtual machine. And so one of the things that's really nice about the Java ecosystem is that there's multiple different languages that can be run on top of the JVM. So one of those is Scala. Another example would be Groovy as an example. Those are all languages that compile down and run on the JVM. And they also are able to interop with existing Java libraries as well. So Kotlin is become the kind of like the standard language now for doing Android programming. So if you're doing mobile programming on Android, for a long time Java was the default language that you'd used, and the last couple of years Google's really kind of like put a lot more effort and resources into making sure that people can use the Kotlin programming language. And so Kotlin definitely has a lot more modern features than Java, but you still are able to take advantage of all the existing Java libraries that are written out there, and but you get to get advantage. You get to take advantage of some of the newer features as well. So, for instance, like if you want to use properties are part of Kotlin. Lambda expressions. So there's a lot of modern features that they're in Kotlin. One of those features is inferred typing. So typically with like Java, you have to declare the type ahead of time. But with Kotlin, you can actually use like a val keyword as an example, and then you don't have to specify the type. It's inferred automatically. So number four, I'm picking a newer programming language called Rust. Rust is pretty interesting. It's another one of these languages. It's a general purpose language. It's not like a traditional object-oriented type of language. It's another language I think that's really kind of gearing itself to be a replacement for the C programming language. It's starting to become a lot more popular. You can write a lot of different stuff. You can write web servers, microservices with it as well. And it's definitely one to take advantage of. It's very fast, and it's actually the compiler is built on top of the LLVM compiler architecture. So it's also pretty portable as well. You can write code that runs on multiple different operating system and architectures. So for that reason, I'm picking number four. Rust for number four. One of the other things that's kind of interesting about Rust is that it was originally developed out of Mozilla, and one of the things they did with it is they were looking for ways they could write stuff that would be faster, where they didn't have to write in C code. And so my understanding is that the CSS rendering engine inside of Firefox, as an example, is written in Rust. So it's definitely one to take an interest in. Number three, Python. Python is another one of these programming languages. It's a dynamic scripting language that's been around for since the 90s. It's a dynamic language as well. It's interpreted very fast, but it's one of those languages that, on top of all the scripting, web stuff that people have been using it for years, it's starting to become increasingly popular with people that are doing a lot of math type-oriented type of development, machine learning, artificial intelligence. There's a lot of frameworks that are built, use Python. And so if you're interested in doing anything with like machine learning, I definitely would consider learning Python. It's used extensively in the machine learning space as well. And it's an easy language to learn as well. Number two, Swift. So Swift is a programming language that was developed out of Apple in 2014. Back in 2015, when they went 2.0, they open sourced the language, and they actually offered compiler support for Linux. And so initially it started off just being kind of like a Mac OS and Linux type of thing. But now there's been a lot of work into getting it so that Windows is at the same level as Linux and Mac OS. And right now it's primarily used, I would have to say, probably with iOS development, tvOS, all the Apple ecosystem type things. But you can write web servers with it as an example. One of the things that has been promoted with it is that there are these web frameworks like Vapor as an example, where you can write your web server or your web services in Swift and then consume them in, let's say, an iOS application. It's also written in Swift. Swift's got a lot of really nice modern features. It has a lot of different ways of being able to do Lambda expressions. Like Kotlin, it also has some features where you have inferred typing, so you don't have to specify the time of the typing when you're writing your code. And it's also different from Kotlin in the sense that when you are actually going to compile your code, the memory management, there's no garbage collection. It's actually using something called Arc, which was made popular in the whole Clang LLVM ecosystem. So the developer who invented the language, Chris Latner, he's not a big fan of garbage collectors. There's some reasons for that. But one of the things that's really nice about LLVM is that it actually takes the memory management and it makes it part of the compilation process. So when you're going to declare a variable, for example, and when you're ready for it to be thrown away when you're done, the release mechanism for letting go of that memory is actually built into the compiler. And it's very slick. So I do, for my day job, I primarily do iOS development. I also do some Android development. And so Swift is now kind of like the default language that we use. There's some new frameworks and stuff that have been developed using Swift. Swift UI is a framework. It's a very declarative style syntax. It's based off of Swift. And that wouldn't have been possible without some of the newer language features that are available in Swift. So Swift is also general purpose, object-oriented, but it's also a very functional language as well. So it's definitely one you might want to consider looking at, especially if you're going to be doing mobile development, but even if you're going to be doing microservice or web server-based development, it's a language that's becoming increasingly popular in that space as well. Then number one on my list to learn in 2021 is JavaScript. So JavaScript is now 25 years old. And I remember when it first came out and starting to write web pages that you could use scripting with. And so JavaScript has had a lot of interesting growth in the last couple of years. And so if you haven't looked at JavaScript in a while, it might be worthwhile coming back and taking a look at some of the new features. Around 2015, 2016's the ES6, which then became the ES year type upgrades. There's a lot of really new cool features that are in JavaScript. JavaScript is not an object-oriented programming language, but it's referred to as a prototypical oriented language. It's also a very functional language, and so one of the things that Brendan Eich was inspired by, who was the original developer behind JavaScript at Mozilla, and then prior to that Netscape, he was inspired by a language called Scheme, which is a very functional style programming language. So there's a lot of functional characteristics of JavaScript as well, even though it's not considered to be a true functional programming language. But it's definitely one, if you're a web developer, you definitely need to know JavaScript. And it's becoming increasingly popular because of Node.js on the server. So if you're doing, if you're trying to do system scripting, if you're trying to do, IoT devices, there's a number of different applications that can be used now for JavaScript. It's not just for web pages anymore. So that's definitely one to take a look at. And I have to be honest up front, I run a JavaScript user group here in Jacksonville, so I'm a little bit biased, but I definitely think that, if you're going to be doing, if you're looking to learn a new programming language in 2021, that's definitely at the top of my list of ones to use. So that is my list for 2021. If you'd like to see more, videos like this, please subscribe to my channel, the Polyglot Engineer channel. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. If you don't like it, you can give it a thumbs down, but give it a thumbs up. That helps me, basically helps me get the word out about the channel. Hoping to be doing a more kind of like content-based videos going over specific language features. One of the things that I'm trying to do with this channel right now is kind of create these short, like 5-minute videos where I talk about a language feature and how you can be using it, with your set of tools and skills. So thank you very much. Have a good night and have a happy 2021.